So I'm Carla Diana, and I am going to be talking about designing for the fourth dimension. My background originally in mechanical engineering, but I always wanted to have a creative side to my career as well. And so I went back to school to Cranbrook Academy of Art, which you'll hear a lot about today, and studied 3D design or product design, and wound up working at firms like Frog Design, Smart Design for many years, Camera Sheet Design for a little bit. And my focus and my interest during graduate school was this realization that the digital and the physical were going to come together, and that they would be, in a sense, their own genre with their own methods. So since that time, I always focused on opportunities to be in that physical digital space. When I worked at Smart Design, I always worked on physical products that had some kind of behavior to them. And so that the design work, a lot of the strategy was around crafting that behavior. So one of the projects I worked on, for example, was Nito Robotics, floor cleaning robot. And I've also always had one foot in academia and one foot in industry, because in academia, I feel like we can really be looking very far into the future, but then in industry, you get the benefit of seeing something that are actually working on things that affect people in their everyday lives. So in academia, I met a professor named Dr. Andrea Tamaz, and we worked on robots. I'll talk about that also a lot as well. I also just love sharing how excited I get about my work. And so a large part of my work is the sharing. I often get asked to write and occasionally write books. So I had a book that was about, I create projects for myself so that I can try out technologies that I'm really interested in. And I had been working with 3D printers, but the fact that 3D printers were becoming ubiquitous was something that I wanted to try out. Like, how does it feel when everybody has a 3D printer that they have access to? So I created this children's book. I interviewed a bunch of experts and decided to put these ideas into the heads of our future generation. Like, what are the possibilities? And distilled it down into 12 possible futures. And then wrote this storybook where everything that's pictured in the book can be downloaded and 3D printed. And then these characters started showing up as fan fiction, and the objects started showing up all over the world. And I have a whole other talk on that. But one of the pieces of writing that was really seminal for me was a op-ed that I did for the New York Times that was called Talking Walking Objects, where I got to talk a little bit about how we might start seeing AI and robotics in our everyday objects, like this lamp that wakes you up in the morning, your mirror, your smart mirror. So this was from 2014, and now we're starting to see a lot of these objects actually becoming startups and being realized. And I also really love to take a critical eye at technology, and it's part of a lot of my pedagogy and my teaching. So I did a piece for Popular Science that's called Don't Blame the Robots, Blame Us, really looking at the importance of design in autonomous vehicles, as well as how they're framed. And then, a big project that's been taking place for the last 5 years at this point, and I speak to you from suburban Detroit. I'm at Cranbrook Academy of Art. I was given the opportunity to create and launch a new department that's called 4D Design in a really established, storied design academy. And the first new department in 37 years, bringing a focus on creativity with technology. And at the same time I was landing here, I was finishing a book that's called My Robot Gets Me. Oh, look, Josh has got a copy right on. And so the story, My Robot Gets Me was a way for me to look back at 10 years of work and tell that story. And that story goes like this. I wanted to work on these physical things that had behavior. That behavior was really something that needed to be crafted. I met Dr. Andrea Tamaz at Georgia Tech, and she was a roboticist and software AI expert who really appreciated design. And so she brought me into projects. So the first project was called Simon, and she was creating a lab. She had come out of MIT studying social robotics and was creating a lab called the Socially Intelligent Machines Lab that was focused on social robots. And I thought, what is social robotics? And I wound up really becoming a focus of my own design work. And what social robotics involves how we relate to computing machines, and can we design machines in a way that all we need to bring to the table are what we know as human beings. So I approach a person, I gesture. Can I approach a machine and gesture? Can it understand me? And that was really the focus of those questions. And so these robots that you see in these next few slides, we worked on, Simon was really an exaggeration. It had cameras and microphones, ears that would move, to amplify the expression, had eyelids and irises. And then there was another project where it was basically a Connect camera on a moving stick, moving pillar. And so, looking at that, like, how can I make that very social? So really playing with amplifying the fact that it can hear. So let me give it some abstracted ears, like what's its field of vision? Looking at like softening the robot, can we work with? So I found a designer who had worked in neoprene. I really wanted to do a neoprene shell with the robot. And we did the shell that was for research that had many applications. And what wound up coming from that was this key value proposition in the hospital setting. So nurses are burnt out, and they're quitting in droves, and the turnover rate is enormous. They're exhausted at the end of the day, and staff clock about 8 to 10 miles a day running back and forth in the hallways. So Dr. Tamaz, with whom I had been working for years, and a collaborator, Vivian Chu, wanted to create a company that addressed this. And so that company is called Diligent Robotics. And the name of the robot is Moxie. And so this was a project of mine before I came to Cranbrook, and has been an ongoing project for about the last over 7 years. And so at the start of the company, I was head of design, starting from scratch, just sketches on a piece of paper, creating the identity, creating everything about the behavior, the architecture. And what we all brought to the table was this deep knowledge of social robotics. And we knew that in this hospital setting that is really hectic, that is really stressful, where there's not a lot of time to train a robot, we needed to be able to have people interact with it in this natural way. So this is Moxie. This is the latest version of Moxie. It's a cabinet that roves around the hospital. Nurses can badge in. They can get meds that the robot can go in the elevator, can get meds from the pharmacist. It can deliver things. It can deliver a piece of birthday cake. So, some of the things that I was looking at as a designer were what were all the different ways of having feedback. So there's facial expression, there's voice response, there's this headband that lights up. So there's, a 10-foot view, there's a 10-inch view, and there's a 2-foot view. So if you're looking at the robot down the hallway, you can look at its headband. You can know if there's an issue. You can know if it's in the middle of a delivery, or if it's free, et cetera, et cetera. I know a lot of this has changed. There are kiosks now. There's a screen that's in the front, but these videos show a little bit of how the robot works.
Go ahead and use your badge.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay.
So this is a pharmacist.
On the
Yes.
Well, that's UI. Things I'm still working on.
Press deliver.
But that gives you a sense of, so then the drawer will open. She can put the meds in the drawer.
All right, thank you.
This is what it looks like roving the hallways. We've actually completely redesigned the hand lately, so it's actually a finger that's expert at pressing buttons, because we realized that there's a human at either end of the delivery route, and so this manipulator was less important than the robot being able to get in and out of elevators and in and out of doors. So that was a really interesting project that took up a lot of time last year, was this new hand. It's cool. Looks like a glove kind of. And then, this is a little bit of the UI, how you request the robot and you order a delivery. Where does it go? What do you ask? I'm gonna go on. What's been really satisfying for me, because I was always struggling with this, how far to push the social aspect, how far to push the friendly, because we had come from this legacy of working on these exaggerated humanoid robots. How can we make it a piece of medical equipment, but not too cute? I didn't want to design a doll. So it was really satisfying to see this enormous feedback from the people who are actually working with the robot day to day, and hear them say like how much they appreciated it, how easy it was to work with, and how it kind of, brightened their day. This is my son, Massimo. And so the hospital up the road here, even though the company's based in Austin, the robots are all over the country. There's a couple that are here. So periodically we go in there and I get to kind of shadow and see how people react to it. And it's been just a real eye opener and really satisfying. So Moxie is an example of social intelligence, like I talked about. But my interest has never been in replicating the human form. I'm a designer who really loves minimalism, and I've always wanted to just understand what are the nuances of this social robotics that we can bring into everyday objects. How can we have a lamp or a microphone or a chandelier or a doorknob that is interacting socially? So that's why I wrote the book, My Robot Gets Me. And that's really what the book is about. It's not about robots in the way that we think of some sci-fi vision. It's about these everyday objects and how we can imbue social interaction into them. And I felt like this was a really critical moment, because we are, in all of the work that I did many years ago, we would kind of have to design things with canned responses. If we had a microwave, it would beep this many times for letting you know that it was finished. It would beep this many times if it was interrupted, or even if there were spoken prompts. And, now we're getting into this moment of the product as entity, where we as designers can decide how it responds in a much bigger, looser sense of social interaction. So that's why I wrote the book, based on what I knew was coming into product design, what I had been working on, and as well as, what I wanted to probe from. So there are a lot of interviews in the books, and I interviewed folks who were creating all kinds of AI tools and assistants. And then as a designer, in my experience working with robotics, this flour sack exercise is something that animators, anybody who studied animation, they work on in order to have a way to have a real abstract, like how minimal can you get, but still have this expression. And, a lot of the book is about that, like, can we look at how objects give us messages beyond the spoken word, beyond a screen with type? Even lights, even a single light can communicate with color temperature, with blinking, with intensity. And then when you get multiple lights, and then when you have a matrix example. So I created this framework, the My Robot Gets Me framework. And it's really meant for people who are working on complex objects to have one point that they can always go back to and just check in with each other, because the teams are enormous. The Moxie project, the Simon projects, like, those were, I work on the design and and there's a lot more to it than the shells, but there is an enormous and fabulous team of people who are working on software development, the mechanical engineering, research, etc. So all those people have to be on the same page. And we use this framework to guide the creative direction. So at the very core is what's in the core innermost oval here, which is presence. And so presence is really, it seems obvious, but the shape of the thing matters. There's a great interview in the book with a designer who was leading the work for Nest cameras. And then I have a project that I like to show. Rocky Jacob is the name of the designer who I interviewed there. There's a project that I worked on that I think really embodies the importance of presence. It's called the Click Brick. And, I was approached by a drummer who wanted to create a metronome. He said, when I'm on stage, I have this stage presence. The drummer sets the beat for the band, and then we have this this little fussy metronome that I have to go over here and kind of punch into. So can I have a drummer's metronome where I can maintain my gestures, I can maintain my stage presence, I can be looking at my other bandmates, and we created the Click Brick. So it's operated entirely with the drumsticks. So you strike it to start it, you strike it to stop, you can tap in a rhythm, or you can roll the knob that's on the end there, and it goes right into, it screws right into the drum kit. So that was a really satisfying product. That's in production now and being shopped at different trade shows. And then, expression's a really big part of this. How do objects express themselves? And, some of the things that I worked on at places like Frog and Smart, and then continue to work on when I do my work with Diligent Robotics, is around light, sound, and movement. So I wanted to just hone in on sound. For the Nito project, I created a series of prototypes and was working with the industrial design team, then also hired a composer friend named Scooby Leposky, who I'd known for many years. And I wrote out the messages in English, like, well, we're going to have to say I'm trapped or I'm full. We have moments of distress. We have moments of delight. Like, how can we translate those into sounds? And so we have this palette of sounds that are still in the Nito, if anybody has a Nito. And there's something that just lets you know that cleaning has begun to work. And then I was excited to talk with the engineers and say, oh, can we recognize if there's a person? And so there is a nuance between something that's moving in front of the robot and something that's static. So we have this hello that's kind of like, oh, hello. And then there are, much shorter things that let you know that there's some issue. Here's a wake up, and then goodbye. We talked a lot about sonic logos and that kind of thing. The next thing in the circle of the framework, once an object can express itself, then you need to give it some input to respond to. So that input is interaction, responding to people in the environment. And again, like with the Leo book, I love creating projects that let me explore something in the technology, something in my lab that I'm excited about. And so I had a residency that was in the same space as a woman named Emily Baltz, who has been on Future Spaces, I believe, and who focuses on the senses and was doing a lot of work with food at the time. And so we put our heads together to do a joint project that wound up being called the Lickistrust. She was really interested in interaction with food. I was really interested in capacitive sensing. And I wanted to know, like, how could we push capacitive sensing, look at different ways of interacting with the object, with our bodies. And we wound up saying, it's kind of interesting that ice cream is one of the few things you eat entirely by licking, and that's socially appropriate and all those kinds of things. So we created this ice cream orchestra that's called the Lickistra. And so anyone can bring a cup of their ice cream and plop it into these plastic cones. And we did a series of events where we led this orchestra. We told people to come in and out of these boxes. We made these boxes so that their hands were not part of the interaction, but you can see a bit of it here. Worked with a composer, his name is Aaron Dyer, to have her compose sound that sounded like ice cream, cold icicles, those kinds of things. Okay, context is the next ring in our framework. And this is the Hammerhead bicycle, which some friends of mine at Tomorrow Lab worked on. My own example of this is, we can have all of our objects now be internet connected. It's really cheap and easy to have a module inside of an object, but we don't need every single feed. So this clever coat rack is something, it's wooden, it's CNC'd, so there's a thin layer film so that there's LEDs that can shine through, but when you're not near it, it's just a wooden coat rack. When you approach it, it wakes up and then it lets you know the high temperature, the low temperature, and the conditions for the day. So this is, it's only the information you need, only at the moment you need it for that split second when you're going out the door. And then ecosystems are thinking not just about that object, but about all the other objects and interfaces that are going to be part of the system. So this is a project that was done by the New York Times lab. That's a listening table that will take notes only when you want it to. You can make it not listen, you can have it listen, but when it's taking notes, you can actually put markers in it. It will understand the text and give context and provide notes to the team. Product relationships and ethics. This is a big part, and it's a big part of what I talk about with students. One of the interviews that I loved in the book was with one of the lead designers, Jonathan Foster, who actually came from a theater background, was a screenwriter, and had led the team in creating Cortana. And so there's lots of interviews in the book, but before we run out of time, I wanted to also then share how this gets shared with my students. So everything around the My Robot Gets Me framework and around this idea of physical interaction was something that was so exciting for me to bring to Cranbrook, because it's an institution that not only has a legacy with design, but has a particular legacy in artifact creation. We have a metalsmithing program, a ceramics program. Saarinen was one of the founders here, and he and his wife, Loya Saarinen, was deeply invested in fabric and fiber. So this, thinking about students being able to do research into interactive fabrics and clothing and those kinds of things was really exciting for me in terms of setting the vision for the program. So the program is really focused on, this is our art museum. Every student shows in the museum. There's also an Institute of Science that's on our campus. So we have an entire cultural institution that's just really outside this door where I am. And, bringing together art and science was really an exciting opportunity, and something that I'm very much in the middle of. This is very much my passion project of the moment, even though I'm 5 years into it. So the students, they work on digital fabrication, 3D printing, projection mapping, sensors, robotics, electronics, everything around this idea of smart objects and what I was just talking about. So the way I describe our craft is it's form, code, and electronics that manifest in sound, light, and movement. So everybody needs to care, again, about presence. What is the form of the thing? Why does form matter? How does form communicate? Code, we all work with microcontroller boards. Arduino is our core to our craft, as well as some things like Raspberry Pi or whatever is at our disposal. And electronics, we are not an engineering program. We are an art, design, and architecture academy. And so my vision is that we have students who learn how to learn. We have peer learning. My ideal mix is artists, designers, and engineers who all share knowledge among one another. And these are some of the things that we explore and look at. We look at experimental electronics, program behaviors, like what I was just showing you. So this is a piece from Chenzo that was an exoskeleton that you would wear, and it would mimic your own movements with this external spine and ribs. Ryan Janina, who's now actually working as an experimental lighting designer in Paris, created this piece for his degree show, which is a lamp. He really carefully made different shapes of then 3D printed each of those elements and crafted this object so that it is sound responsive. So it will change color temperature based on the sound that's in the room. So if it's a really crowded room, but he also worked a lot on the texture and the dimensionality of those lights that are totally custom designed and 3D printed. And then we have Michael Candy, who's actually out in LA and just moved out there and is working with some folks as a researcher at UC Santa Barbara. And his interest is really expressive robotics. So he was a student that I very much recruited to the program as part of what the vision of the program would be. So this is a series of some of his robotics pieces. He's shown at the biennial in Australia and has just had really wonderful reception all over the world. He created this, he had watched a video about a robot that was called Little Sunfish that was sent into the reactor at Fukushima to explore and learn from it after the disaster. And he was looking for this open source information about this robot, didn't find it, and recreated it and created a little film with this robot as a character. So it kind of blinks, it has some expression, but he recreated what the inside of the reactor looks like and created a film that tells this story about this little character that gets contaminated and then escapes and goes out in the ocean. And he's got some great stills. Like there's one where an octopus actually grabbed this and hugged it. And it's another piece of Michael's. This is a piece that he did here that has a weighted motor so that it will constantly rotate around the room like a timepiece. And then virtuality and digital presence is part of, even though I talk so much about physicality, it is about that balance between the virtual and the real. And so we do have students. We just completed, I bring in part of the program. It's very unique pedagogy. Students work on their own projects individually. I am their mentor, and I basically curate a series of visitors who come and do workshops with the students. So we're in the middle of a touch designer workshop right now. We had Julian Bleeker and Dre LeBray, who I see in our audience, come and do a workshop with us around looking at the design of artifacts from the future, design fiction. We've had Motomichi, the projection mapping artist. We've have Yuri Suzuki, who specializes in sound and sound sculptures, who's going to be coming this fall. We had somebody named Kevin Henry come in and do visualization. So that's a big part of the experience. And the projects you see are all just independent projects that the students work on. So Vikram Kaladindi, who graduated in 22, had created this NFT that's called a pound of flesh. And the vision behind this was that he had 20 pounds that he wouldn't mind losing. And he was working on a contract where each NFT that was sold would be sold with a contract that he would lose a pound for the sale. And there were only 20 of these that would be out there. And so it was a little bit like also examining the idea of NFTs and scarcity, and how do we create scarcity, and can we really have like where does value come from in art, like all of those questions. Jerry Lee, who graduated in 21 for his degree show, created this giant emoji that shows the mood of the room. So kind of riffing on those things that you see at the airports and malls, and then created this motorized giant emoji that was in the museum show. There's Jerry working on it. Vikram also created this a piece called A God Forsaken, which had and he crafted this. Our students they're doing a lot of crafting of the setup with the motors. So there's a Sharpie there in the middle of these two servo motors that can control it, and he's scrubbing the chat from video game dialogue and then having that reproduced in this room by itself. So here's a little close-up of what that installation looked like. And then, a social commentary, as I've already been mentioning, critical thinking is just it's a core part of the entire academy. It's a very important part of the 4D design department. We want to be at that place where we are not only appreciating technology, but also, taking a look at the ethics of what it means to have these technologies in our lives. And so this is a piece by Meryl Norlander. I had my first group of students come in September of 2019, and then by 2020, things were different. 2021 to 22, when this group graduated, we were in person. So I had encouraged folks to use our campus to do work outdoors that we could all appreciate and see outdoors since we couldn't be in the room together. And so she was interested in looking at gender fluidity and gender identity. So this is a fluid space that she created. That's actually a pool of pebbles. So she had projected video of herself in the swimming pool. She had a performer, Brian Kovac, who was singing a aria from Carmen at the same time. And that is a Greek theater, which is part of our campus where we hold certain outdoor events. So there's Brian performing while there's projection mapping taking place all around him, swimming all around him. This is another piece of Michael's. He was looking at how, ethics are being determined for robots like autonomous vehicles. So he created this selfless driving car. He gave everyone, and this is a model, but he aspires to have this be a full-size car that he would be in. And the way that it works is there is an audience that has an interface. So everyone in the audience can decide if the car should be going left or right. And so the audience has to be working together and the car. So he has this working prototype at a small scale, but the idea is to have it at a larger scale. And then again, materiality is just a really important part of it. My vision for the program is always for it to be a holistic look. We can't ignore the physical body. We can't ignore the relationship between the body and an object. We can't ignore physical spaces. These are all part of design when you're designing for interaction. So Meryl did a piece that was a wearable glowing exoskeleton of an sorts, another wearable glowing folded paper. And Emily Bomarito was exploring soft robotics. So these are all cast silicone that have pneumatic power that goes into them. So when they blow up, they change shape and they can grasp things or move in different ways. And then Chen Zhu, for his graduated in 21 from my very first cohort. His degree show he was working with ferrofluid. So he had created, this was actually on a piece that would look like a painting and it would look like it was ink, but then periodically it would actually change and move around the canvas. And then Cody Norman is one of our electives. He was in the 3D design department, but us being in Detroit is very exciting because there is a lot of robotics that happens behind closed doors. Cody has been continuing a great practice around working with robot arms to create new forms and artifacts. And I was just talking with Josh, I'm doing a project with New Lab. There's a branch of New Lab that's just opened here in downtown Detroit. So I'm very excited about collaborations between the 4D design department and New Lab here in Detroit. And so it's been an exciting ride. And my biggest problem is that people don't know that we exist. So I really appreciate all of you as the audience. If you know a young person, not young, if you know a person, let's not put age to it because we've had graduate students of all ages. Actually, Cranbrook is a good place for a student of any age. But if you know creative people who are looking to pivot their careers, amplify their careers, take time out to explore, please send them my way. I would love to talk to them about the 4D design department. And I also have a creative practice and I'd love to collaborate. So there you have it. That's what I wanted to share with the webinar today. And thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Carla. That was fantastic. All right. Anybody have any questions you want to put in the chat? I have so many questions or so many. I have so many thoughts.
Here, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm sure you can also get my contact. I'm so far Googleable. So you can also, if you didn't get my contact, you should be able to find me.
Yeah, and I can also intro anybody. All right. Any questions? All right, I got some questions. So one of the things that I thought was really fascinating was when you were talking about Moxie and changing the hand from a grip to a finger pointer. Well, and just like how robots are being designed to like adapt to our world, but then also like they can communicate with, I mean, robots can communicate with each other like through Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and like they have telepathy. Like there's probably all these other affordances that they have when they're just dealing with each other. And so I don't know, just it put me down a weird kind of rabbit hole of thought. I was just kind of curious how you guys are thinking about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, certainly they're networked. And in fact, one of the bigger, and maybe what's brought me onto this new project I'm working on, around what the future of autonomous vehicles is that the bigger design work now is not in the individual robot, it's actually in the network of robots and how do you design for a fleet, right? And then the other thing that this touches on, I wrote a piece for Qualcomm had a blog called Spark, and I wrote a piece about the robot readable world. You just like kind of thinking about, you know, are we, how much of our culture is now robot culture? Like if we have to change doorknobs, if we have to change street signs, if we have to change facades on cafes and things like that, and like what does that mean for culture? And I think that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Nicole, you had a question. Do you wanna ask it? You're already camera on. Do you wanna? There you
Oh,
go.
yeah, it's not a problem. I was just curious, like, if you were using like AI in your processes with the new innovations and like how far ChatGPT's come, like, especially with the new GPTs, like, has that affected your process at all? Or do you like, how do you see it in the future?
Oh yeah, no, that's a great question. It has very much affected my process for my own practice. I'm finding myself um so I'm working on, I wanted to do a launch party for the new program that didn't happen because we launched in a pandemic. And so I'm back to it now and I'm creating this host garment. And I started designing it the way that I usually do with sketches and maybe some Pinterest. And then I started throwing it in to Midjourney, and it's completely pivoted the way, the shape of the dress, the way, like the fact that it might have these lights in it, the way the lights were. And now I'm actually almost using those as my own sketches for this physical object. So there's kind of, and then I'll make something. So I've actually purchased these lights that look very much like this. I have it here, like um and I had put these,
Oh
I
my
had
God.
posted some of these on Instagram, and I had a friend that I knew from Frog who said, well, that's great, those are AI, but there's so many artists who are working in the real world. And I just thought, no, this is process, like it's part of the like no, so now I've looked into these LED strands out of fruit cells. Some of them, they call them nudes, like noodles, and I'm playing with those in fabric. And so it's a back and forth, like so for in that sense, I think it's interesting. And then like the workshop that we just did with Neo Future Lab with Julian Bleeker and Dre involved, we took a trip to the Henry Ford Museum here and look at artifacts that were part of the history of Detroit, and then
Mhm.
talk about what a future of Detroit might be. And so I think in the design fiction realm, just being able to do storytelling is very powerful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's super interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, sure.
Phil, you had a question?
Yeah. For the program, or actually in your work, when you work with industry, are you working with them to help spark ideas with them, or are you working to develop a commercializable product? And similarly, do your students work with industry? And finally, you've started a school. Is it getting funding from the outside, or is it funded through the university?
Yeah, so all great questions, many questions. I'm going to try to keep track of them.
Okay.
The 4D design department is part of Cranbrook Academy of Art, and we're part of, we are a college, we're part of a larger educational institution. So it was, is partially funded by grants and philanthropy, but it's part of our nonprofit organization, umbrella organization. In my own practice, I do get pulled in to work. I love working on the initial stages. of product creation. I think that was always my favorite part of the process, or being, I do get pulled in as a consultant from time to time to work on future thinking projects, or to bring my experience with hands-on working on with robotics to kind of predict how it might inform the future. I continue to work with Diligent, but I've moved over to a design advisor. So I'm not as much in the day-to-day. Occasionally things come up like this hand project and I love form. Like I really love form and the way form communicates. So I love learning. Like there is a synergy among everything, because when I work on a project with Diligent, they're always at the cutting edge of what's happening in robotics. So, they're using a new sensor, let's say, or a new RGBD camera. And then I get to ask their engineers all about that and understand what the parameters are of that, and then bring that back to the students and have them think about that. In terms of the students working with industry, I would love to figure out a way to make that mutually beneficial. When I first got here, I was talking with a bunch of folks around it. It can be a tricky thing. In previous institutions I've been in, there were sometimes experiences that felt like getting inexpensive design work, and especially the Cranbrook model involves students who are so vastly different and independently motivated that we have like, I had someone from IDEO come last year, Dave Vondel, who did a workshop with our students and talked about IDEO. And we did this workshop with nitinol wire where we had these flowers that would change based on the sound that they were generating sound. It was a super great workshop, very hands-on. And then, one of my students is an expert. He actually comes from the automotive industry, Jose Maldonado, and he is expert at sketching with Gravity Sketch. So sketching in 3D with this kind of gesture. And so when Dave came in from IDEO, he spent a lot of time talking with Jose and wound up having Jose give all the folks at IDEO, not all the folks, but the folks who were interested in VR sketching, giving them a seminar on how to do VR sketching. And I love that. Like that was really, I think, an amazing moment where, we had someone from industry come in and influence us, but then we also had this like sharing and exchange. There's also a prosthetics. There's a company here in Detroit that makes prosthetics. So I've taken the students on a field trip to visit the prosthetic studio. And then that person has come over here because he wanted to learn more about the virtual sketching and how that might affect sculpting. I mean, they sculpt like noses and fingers. And so I love that exchange. I haven't quite figured out how to make it a project, but would, love input.
Good, thank you.
Jay, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. When I see this vision that you're painting, Carla, of lamps communicating objects around us, we're suddenly relating to the world with in a way that feels very old. Like this feels like a reenchantment of the world, where suddenly it's like it's an animist world. And I'm curious about if you ever think about, or if you're working with, the when I see the early concerns of AI, it's people treating like they try to break AI by like abusing it, right? And like it's not real. It's not alive. I get it. You're not actually abusing it, but it brings out this interactional style that feels unhealthy for the people doing it. And I'm curious if you're thinking about how this sort of re-enchantment, how socially relating to objects can help people orient towards a more compassionate relationship to neurodiversity, the more than human world, things like that.
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. I mean, In terms of the abuse, it's very interesting. I mean, I have a child, I have an 8-year-old, and I actually force myself to say, please and thank you to Alexa and Siri. Could you set a timer, please? Just to, model behavior. And I think that, one of the workshops that we had here early on was with someone, Timi Oyedeji, who's now at Google, who was working at Space 10 with IKEA on a research project around machine learning and gesture. And he gave us this workshop on how we could, because gesture hasn't worked very well because you have to replicate this exact gesture. But what he was getting us to was, can we have machine learning so that, if I make a peace sign like this, I mean, a peace sign or like a shush sign or something, that my shush sign is different than your shush sign is, can we have the machine understand me as an individual? And so, I mean, I don't know if that gets to your question about neurodiversity, but I do feel like there's some leeway for, considering diversity in terms of gesture and expression.
Okay. Let's see. We have, okay. So we have about 6 minutes left. All right, John, you had a one. We'll let this be the last question. You want to ask the question?
Yeah, Carla, great talk. Very cool. I'm building a little bit on Jay's question. So, your example of Moxie, the non-verbal or non-humanoid robotic communication with people who are working hard in a hospital setting. During the development of that, I was wondering kind of like what kind of process did you go through to prototype some of those interactions and those cues, and were there any hiccups?
Yeah, that is I love this question because it is really kind of core to what I talk about in the book and the importance of it. And I'm still still talk with the folks at Diligent about how much we keep going back to the process periodically. A big part of the process is, we have this history of looking at like so many of the things that I've worked on, we have a sketch or we have a PowerPoint deck. And what you really need for these kind of projects is a storyboard. And so you have to really storyboard out, where is the person, what's their location, what else is in the environment. So in order to do that in an informed way, first of all, there's a lot of deep research, and there was a lot of deep research that went into the work with Moxie in hospital settings with healthcare personnel, with people from all different ranks at the hospital, talking with them, shadowing with them, looking at things like, what are they wearing? Do they have gloves on? What else, what tasks are they in the middle of? And then one of the big processes that's really informed the design was body storming. So, actually so you can't be in the hospital all the time, like in the studio, replicating, like we replicated what the pharmacy in the hospital looked like with, shelves and whatever boxes we have handy and foam core mock-ups. And we have someone act out the role of the robot. Like, so someone is the robot and we like put Post-its on that person's head so that we can see that, oh, now it's giving me an alert, like now it's doing this. And we study, some of the gestures from the robot in that way. And we have somebody who plays the role of the pharmacist. And it really, really reveals things like, oh my goodness, like this is a blood sample. It can't be put in a drawer like this, or this is, like, how do we make sure that someone else doesn't follow the robot, or like all of these like security and safety concerns, as well as the nuances of interaction. Or, the robot, it's kind of quiet. So like I mean, this was one of the hiccups. Like one of the projects that came in in the last couple of years was, can we add a sound for when it's coming down the hallway? Because it's actually kind of quiet, and then people don't see it when they're coming at an intersection and it's coming there. Or, there are lots of questions that we haven't resolved around. So it's still around social interaction. I mean, it's really a rich space. It's really important. Like, being in an elevator with a robot, like, brings up just tons of questions of how do you design that behavior appropriately, like who enters first, who leaves, like how does this, does the robot ask someone to push the button, like all those questions.
All right, I love it. Okay, so we did perfect here. We got 2 minutes left.
Right,
Carla, thanks again. This was absolutely fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. As we sort of leave today, do you have any sort of like parting words or thoughts or anything like that? Definitely, it sounds like a good call to action is if you know anybody who belongs at Cranbrook, let them know, because it's an amazing program. But is there anything else you'd like to sort of wrap up with today?
No, I mean, thank you all for coming, and let's approach design in a holistic way. It's not just about a thing or a screen. It's about everything around it.
All right, I love it. All right, thanks so much. Good to see everybody. Hope to see you again
Thank you.
sometime soon.
Okay.
Everyone,
Thank you.
have a great one. Bye. Oh, here.